What if the moment you stopped chasing her was the exact moment she started noticing you? Attention is one of the most powerful currencies you have, and most people give it away without even realizing it. Every time you constantly check your phone waiting for a reply, every time you drop what you're doing just to respond instantly, every time you prioritize someone else's presence over your own purpose, you are spending your attention like it has no value. But the truth is, attention shapes perception. The more freely you give it, the less meaningful it becomes. When you give attention without limit, it sends a silent message. My time is always available. My focus has no boundaries. And while that might feel like care or effort, it often comes across as neediness. Not because you're weak, but because you're showing that your world can be easily interrupted. People are naturally drawn to what feels valuable, and value is often tied to scarcity. If something is always available, it loses its edge, it becomes predictable, expected, taken for granted. That's why attention, when controlled, becomes powerful. It's not about being cold or distant, it's about being intentional. When you choose where your focus goes, you're showing that your life has structure, that your time matters, that not everything deserves immediate access to you. Think about it this way: when your attention is constantly centered on someone else, you slowly lose connection with yourself. Your goals get delayed, your discipline weakens, your energy gets scattered. And over time, you start to feel empty, not because they took something from you, but because you gave too much away. Real strength is being able to hold your attention where it belongs. You don't need to reply instantly to prove interest. You don't need to always be available to prove value. You don't need to chase conversations to keep someone around. If someone respects you, they will understand your space. And if they don't, then your attention wouldn't have earned their respect anyway. The right people don't require you to abandon yourself to keep them. When you start treating your attention as something valuable, everything changes. You become more focused, more calm, more grounded. You stop reacting impulsively and start responding with intention. And ironically, that's when people begin to notice you more. Because there's something different about someone who isn't constantly seeking attention. There's a quiet confidence in it, a sense of control. It shows that your life is already full, and your attention is something to be earned, not assumed. So instead of asking, how do I get more of their attention? Start asking, who actually deserves mine? Because once you understand that attention is power, you stop giving it away for free, and you start investing it where it truly matters. Emotional control is one of the most underrated forms of strength, and yet it shapes how people perceive you more than words, looks, or even actions. When you are emotionally unstable, reacting to every message, every delay, every shift in someone's tone, you don't just lose composure, you also lose presence. But when you learn to stay calm, no matter what is happening around you, something subtle but powerful begins to change in how others respond to you. Emotional control doesn't mean you don't feel anything. It means you don't let your feelings control your behavior. You can feel attraction, disappointment, confusion, or even frustration, but you don't rush to express it in a way that disrupts your peace or weakens your position. Instead, you observe, you process, and you respond only when it is necessary. That space between emotion and reaction is where real power exists. Most people are driven by impulse. A late reply triggers anxiety. A change in behavior triggers overthinking. A lack of attention triggers chasing. And in that chase for emotional relief, they start acting out of alignment with their true self. They text too much, explain too much, or try too hard to fix something that isn't even broken yet. This emotional dependency creates pressure, and pressure kills attraction. Because attraction is not built in chaos. It is built in calm. When you remain emotionally stable, you create a different kind of energy. You don't become easily shaken by external validation. You don't switch moods based on someone else's attention. You stay grounded. And that grounding sends a silent message. I am in control of myself, no matter what happens outside. That message is powerful without needing explanation. People are naturally drawn to emotional stability because it feels safe. It feels mature. It feels rare. In a world where most people react instantly, overthink constantly, and chase validation repeatedly, someone who remains calm stands out without trying. Silent attraction is built in these moments of restraint. When you don't overreact to distance. When you don't panic over silence. When you don't demand emotional reassurance every time your mind gets uncertain. Instead, you let things unfold naturally. You give space. You breathe. You continue your life without emotional interruption. That kind of control creates curiosity. It creates respect. It creates an unspoken pull. Because people start wondering why you are not reacting the way others would. They start noticing that you are not easily disturbed. And in that observation, attraction begins to form, not because you forced it, but because your emotional stability stands out. But the deeper truth is this: emotional control is not about influencing others. It is about protecting yourself. It ensures that your happiness is not placed in someone else's behavior. It keeps your identity intact when situations become uncertain. When you master emotional control, you stop being easily manipulated by mood shifts, attention changes, or unpredictable behavior. You stay centered, and in staying centered, you naturally become more attractive, not through effort, but through presence. Because nothing pulls people in more quietly than a person who doesn't fall apart when things are unclear, but instead remains steady, composed, and unshaken. Scarcity builds curiosity because the human mind is naturally drawn to what it cannot easily access. When something is always available, it becomes routine, predictable, almost invisible. But when access becomes limited, when presence is not constant, when attention is not guaranteed, the mind starts to pay attention. It starts to question. It starts to wonder. This is not just about relationships or attraction. It's a psychological principle that shows up in every area of life. People don't value what they have unlimited access to. They value what feels rare, uncertain, or difficult to obtain. Scarcity creates importance not because something changes in value itself, but because perception changes. When someone is always available, always responding, always present, there is no space for curiosity to grow. Everything is already known, already given, already predictable. The mind doesn't feel the need to explore further because there is no gap to fill. But when availability is limited, when responses are not immediate, when attention is not constantly offered, that gap becomes active. The mind begins to engage. It starts asking questions like, what are they doing? Why are they not always available? What makes their time so occupied? That mental engagement is the beginning of curiosity. Scarcity works because it creates emotional contrast. Humans are wired to notice absence more than presence. You don't think about the air you breathe until it's restricted. In the same way, you don't fully value constant attention until it becomes inconsistent. The shift from always there to not always there is what triggers awareness. But scarcity is not about playing games or intentionally disappearing to manipulate feelings. When used correctly, it is about having a life that is genuinely full. A life where your time, focus, and energy are already committed to something meaningful. When your attention is divided among your goals, growth, responsibilities, and self-respect, you naturally become less available, and that is what creates healthy scarcity. This kind of scarcity is not forced, it is authentic, and authenticity is what makes it powerful. When people sense that your time is not freely empty, they begin to value it more. Not because you told them to, but because your life shows it. You are not waiting around. You are not constantly accessible. You are engaged in your own direction. And that creates curiosity because it signals depth. Curiosity is emotional interest without full understanding. It is what happens when someone knows just enough about you to be interested, but not enough to be fully satisfied. And that balance is only possible when you don't overexpose yourself. Overexposure kills mystery. And without mystery, curiosity disappears. Scarcity preserves mystery. It creates space for imagination, and imagination is powerful because people often build attraction, not from what they know about you, but from what they don't know yet. However, the strongest form of scarcity is not physical absence, it is emotional independence. When you are not emotionally dependent on attention, approval, or constant interaction, you naturally create distance. Not out of avoidance, but out of self-completeness. That self-completeness makes you harder to figure out. And anything that is harder to figure out automatically becomes more interesting. So scarcity is not about being unavailable on purpose. It is about being so engaged in your own life that your presence becomes selective. And when presence is selective, it gains meaning. And when it gains meaning, curiosity naturally follows. Self-respect is one of the most powerful qualities a person can carry, yet it is often misunderstood. Many people spend their energy seeking approval, trying to be liked, accepted, or validated by others, but in doing so, they slowly weaken their own sense of value. Approval seeking creates dependency. Self-respect creates strength. And that difference is what ultimately shapes how others perceive you. When someone constantly seeks approval, their behavior becomes reactive. They adjust their words, their actions, even their personality based on how others might respond. They become focused on being chosen rather than standing firmly in who they are. Over time, this creates an imbalance. Instead of being seen as confident, they are seen as uncertain. Instead of being respected, they are often taken lightly. Self-respect works differently. It is not loud. It does not demand attention. It simply sets a standard. When you respect yourself, you naturally begin to protect your time, your energy, and your emotional space. You don't over-explain yourself to be understood. You don't over-give to be appreciated. You don't compromise your boundaries just to be accepted. And that quiet firmness is deeply attractive because people are naturally drawn to those who value themselves. There is something grounding about someone who doesn't need constant validation to feel secure. It creates a sense of stability. You don't feel like they are emotionally unpredictable or dependent on external approval to function. Instead, you sense that they are anchored within themselves. Approval seeking, on the other hand, creates pressure. When someone is always trying to be liked, their energy feels heavy. There is an unspoken need behind their actions. They might agree too quickly, stay too long in situations that don't serve them, or ignore their own discomfort just to maintain acceptance. And while this may seem like kindness on the surface, it often comes across as a lack of inner boundaries. Self-respect introduces clarity. It quietly communicates, I know who I am, and I won't abandon myself for acceptance. That mindset changes everything. It affects how you speak, how you respond, and how you carry yourself in difficult situations. You stop chasing validation because you are no longer uncertain about your worth. And interestingly, when you stop seeking approval, you often receive more genuine respect from others. Not because you are trying to earn it, but because you are no longer lowering your standards to get attention. People begin to understand that your presence is not something that can be easily influenced or manipulated. It has structure. It has limits. It has integrity. Self-respect also changes your emotional reactions. You don't panic when someone withdraws attention. You don't overthink every interaction. You don't feel the need to prove yourself repeatedly. Instead, you remain steady. And that steadiness creates a quiet form of attraction that doesn't need explanation. Because in the end, approval seeking says, please accept me. But self-respect says, I already accept myself. And the way people respond to those two energies is completely different. One creates dependency and uncertainty. The other creates admiration and curiosity. One drains you. The other strengthens you. That is why self-respect will always be more attractive than approval seeking. It does not chase value. It reflects it naturally. Walking away is often misunderstood as giving up, but in reality, it is one of the strongest expressions of self-respect and emotional strength. Holding on desperately to something that no longer aligns with your peace, your value, or your growth does not make you loyal. It makes you dependent. And dependency slowly weakens your sense of identity. Walking away, on the other hand, restores it. When someone holds on desperately, their decisions become driven by fear. Fear of losing connection, fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of not being enough. That fear creates attachment that is not based on love or respect, but on emotional insecurity. In that state, a person often ignores their own boundaries. They tolerate inconsistency. They accept confusion. They overinvest in situations where their energy is not being matched. And slowly, they begin to lose themselves in the process. Desperation changes behavior. It makes people over-explain, over-text, over-chase, and overthink every small interaction. Instead of standing in their value, they start negotiating it. They begin to believe that if they just try harder, give more, or wait longer, things will eventually change. But real change does not come from desperation. It comes from clarity. Walking away is clarity in action. It is the moment you recognize that your peace is more important than your attachment. That your self-worth cannot be continuously compromised for temporary connection. That no matter how strong your feelings are, they should not force you to abandon yourself. When you walk away, you are not losing something, you are choosing yourself. And that choice carries strength because it breaks emotional dependency. It says, I will not stay in a place where I am not valued, understood, or respected. That mindset immediately shifts your energy. Instead of chasing what is uncertain, you reclaim control over your direction. What most people don't realize is that walking away often creates more impact than holding on ever could. Desperation pushes people away, but self-respect draws attention. When someone is used to your constant presence, your consistent effort, and your emotional availability, your absence becomes noticeable. Not because you left to manipulate, but because you stopped abandoning yourself. That shift changes everything. Walking away is not about anger or punishment. It is about alignment. It is about recognizing when something no longer matches your emotional standards and having the courage to step out of it without needing validation or closure from the other person. It requires strength to leave something you care about, but it requires even more strength to stay and slowly lose yourself in it. Holding on desperately keeps you emotionally stuck. It keeps you waiting, hoping, and overanalyzing situations that may never change. Walking away frees you from that loop. It brings you back to your own life, your own goals, your own identity. And in that return to yourself, something powerful happens. You begin to rebuild your energy. You become less reactive, more grounded, more focused. You stop needing external situations to feel complete. That is why walking away is stronger than holding on desperately. Because holding on may show attachment, but walking away shows self-respect. And self-respect is the foundation of real emotional strength. Most people think attraction comes from doing more texting, more chasing, more proving. But the truth is the opposite. Real attraction often begins when you learn the discipline of holding back. Not out of ego, not out of games, but out of self-respect. Ignoring someone the right way isn't about hurting them, it's about not losing yourself. Now the speech. You don't ignore a woman to make her feel small, you ignore her to remind yourself that your life is already full. Most men get this wrong. They think ignoring means acting cold, disappearing randomly, or playing mind games. That's weakness disguised as control. Real control is quiet, it's steady. It doesn't need to prove anything. When you're always available, always replying instantly, always adjusting your mood based on her attention, you slowly lose your value. Not because you're not enough, but because you're showing her that your world revolves around her. And the truth is, nothing kills attraction faster than that. The right way to ignore isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's subtle. It's when you choose your time over chasing her validation. It's when you don't feel the need to respond to every message immediately. It's when your focus stays on your purpose, your goals, your peace, no matter who walks into your life. Because a man who is busy building himself doesn't have time to chase attention. And that's what makes him magnetic. When you stop over-giving, something shifts. She starts to feel your absence. Not because you disappeared, but because you're no longer overextending yourself. You're no longer trying to impress. You're simply existing in your own lane. That creates mystery, and mystery creates attraction. But understand this clearly. Ignoring the right way is not about punishing her. It's about protecting your energy. It's about knowing that your time, your focus, your presence, these are valuable. And not everyone automatically deserves unlimited access to them. You don't ignore her texts out of anger. You don't pull away to manipulate her emotions. You simply stop making her the center of your world. Because she shouldn't be, your life should be. When you're grounded in yourself, you don't react emotionally to everything she does. If she takes time to reply, you don't panic. If she pulls back, you don't chase. You stay steady, calm, focused. That calmness speaks louder than words ever could. And here's what most people don't realize. When you stop chasing, you give her space to feel your absence. You give her room to wonder, to question, to come closer, not because you forced it, but because she chose to. That's the difference between attention that is given and attention that is earned. And people value what they have to earn. So instead of trying to win her over with constant effort, win yourself over. Build a life that excites you. Focus on your growth, your discipline, your peace. Because when your life becomes full, you naturally stop chasing what doesn't match your energy. And in that moment, you don't need to ignore her anymore. You've simply outgrown the need to seek her attention.